welcome everybody to the August full council meeting held on the last Tuesday of every month. I'd like to officially open the meeting, being 1 o'clock. Please, a little bit of housework. I need to call for apologies, but that's not really necessary because we do have a full house. Webcam is webcam on, please, staff. We have two new staff members, Vicky and Howie, over here on the right. So welcome into the chamber and hope you enjoy your day. So we don't need a mover or a seconder for the apologies because there aren't any. So I'm going to move straight away to agenda item number 1, which is a presentation council agreed to. Approximately, I'm hoping won't go over half an hour, including questions, from Friends of Lake Taupo. And I see Johnny Bell is here to present that presentation. And I'd just like to remind my fellow councillors that it is a presentation to us. We may like to take, some of us may like to take the opportunity at the end of it to ask some questions of clarity, not of opinion. That will then be followed by a presentation from Gavin and Leroy from Mighty River Power, who I will introduce formally when Johnny Bell from Friends of Lake Taupo has finished. And then I'm told also that Waikato Regional Council want approximately about a 15-minute to present to us as well. So without any further ado, Johnny, I will hand over to you and welcome here, and we're in your capable hands.
Thank you very much, Rick. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you. Our presentation basically summarises here all the concerns that we have made in a submission to the Regional Council about the resource consent that Mighty River Power holds for the operation of Lake Taupo, and what I'm giving here is just a summary of those concerns. The main basis of our concern is the fact that there are a lot of mismatches, and I'll refer frequently to that during the presentation, between what was said in the application for the resource consent, what was assessed as being the effects of that activity, and what has happened since the consent has been operational. The first major mismatch is that the basis of the whole application was the fact that MRP would operate a lake level which was, I'll use the quote, similar to natural. And that's the exact quote out of their application for consent. So it would be similar to natural for effects on the lake. Another issue that we've got is that the consent actually doesn't control lake levels below the maximum control level. So although they applied for an as natural consent, there is no mechanism in the consent to require them to do that, operate that as natural. The current mitigation process, which I'll touch on later, we feel is not working as is intended by Clause 7.6 of the consent. Clause 7.6 requires any erosion caused by hydro use of the lake to be mitigated by the consent holder. And following on from that, and I hope that the Regional Council will tidy this up later on, there is a lot of confusion between the consent and project watershed and the erosion and flooding strategy as to who does what. And that's a circle that can go round and round in a loop several times. Just quickly, the quick summary of the Mighty River Power consent. In 2003, they were granted consents to operate the control gates. Again, the lake level regime was going to be similar to natural. There was no assessment of erosion effects because there was going to be no change in the lake level management regime. And at the time, it's important to note that Niwa, who was the consultant for Mighty River Power, said that any increase in lake levels would increase erosion. One other mismatch in the consent process is about the use of the lake for flood management or flood attenuation. There is very little, if any, assessment of effects for the flood attenuation activity in Mighty River Power's application, principally because it's not actually their activity, it's the activity of the Regional Council. All rules around flood management are managed by the Regional Council themselves, and they can change those rules without reference to the consent or any other person. The rules for flood management stand outside of the consent, and that's a key one here. Just as a point, we all know what happened in 1998, and the experience of that shows us that during a flood, and a big flood when they have to protect the lower Waikato, the effects on the lake can be significant to extreme, and in that flood the water level was 150 millimetres higher than natural, and they've used the lake, as far as I can see it from interpretation of the assessment of effects, 8 times since 1960, and in 6 of those 8 times the lake was higher than natural significantly during the process. Again, flood attenuation is not a natural process. During the consent process, the Regional Council had concerns about the fact that there was little historic information on lake levels, and there was a lot of uncertainty on the effects of the proposed lake management regime. And I'd say that at the moment that those statements are still valid 10 years after the effect.
Can I just interrupt you, Johnny?
Yeah?
I might be wrong, but I don't think you're changing your slides at the same time as
sorry,
you're
Rick.
And you're losing us. Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry,
Waikato Regional Council, sorry.
You're welcome.
Sorry about that. Okay. The Regional Council's concerns, yep. They said that there was no information, and that's still very valid to date. Okay. They also realised that because of those uncertainties, they needed to have review conditions in the consent to address the effects of the manner in which the hydro system is operated. The Commissioners at the time, in their report, noted that given that the proposed regime, i.e. the similar to natural, is very similar to the present, there is no effect that requires mitigation. We'll show you in a few slides that the current operating regime is very different to natural. The Commissioners also included conditions for a review, just in case that should certain circumstances come to pass. In our opinion, those certain circumstances have come to pass because we've seen some significant erosion around the lake. In the consent holder shall be responsible for any erosion control work which would not occur without the hydro operation of the lake. Now, that sits in as clause 7.6 in the consent, and is actually the only clause in the consent that requires the consent holder to mitigate any effects of the activity they carry out. Now, the Regional Council have told me that clause 7.6 does not apply to erosion, and I'll be interested to hear why they think that. But if you take clause 7.6 out for erosion, then there is actually no requirement on Mighty River Power to mitigate any effects at all. So, going on from that, there are no flood attenuation controls in the consent, so that activity is totally and utterly at the Regional Council's discretion as to how they manage it and what they do. Interestingly, they say that Lake Karapiro must be managed similar to natural, but Lake Taupo on the Lake Taupo levels, they're silent. So I'd like to think that what's good for Karapiro is good for Taupo, but that's how the Commissioners saw it. Again, there is a review clause to enable the updating of the consent. Under the operating regime in the consent,